Sign this now, or we terminate you. Those were the first words Ethan Crowell, Chief Executive Officer, said to me after 19 years of work. No greeting, no explanation. Just a manila folder pushed across the table at 4:47 p.m. The kind of meeting scheduled when companies don't want witnesses, only consequences. I stood there for a second, still holding my notebook, the same one I'd carried into this building since before Ethan finished college. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "Can you explain what this is about?" He didn't look up from his laptop. Excel was open. Rows, percentages, cost columns highlighted in red. "There's nothing to explain. Daisy," he said, "your role no longer aligns with our future. You can resign today and walk out clean. Or we end your employment immediately. No severance." This story contains dramatized, fictional elements and AI-assisted narration intended to highlight real workplace lessons. If this isn't your kind of content, please feel free to leave, get some rest, and take care of your health. I was Daisy Knox, Senior Director of Operations, 19 years. That's how long I'd kept the systems running when audits failed, when vendors vanished, when deadlines collapsed. I built workflows that survived 3 CEOs and 2 recessions. Ethan had been here 8 months. "So this is performance?" I asked. He finally looked at me, annoyed. "This is efficiency. No HR discussion, no warning, no documentation, just pressure and silence, dressed up as strategy." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not anger yet, something tighter, controlled, compressed. "You have 30 minutes, he continued. "Sign the resignation we prepared, or security will escort you out." I glanced at the letter. It was neat, polite, final. It erased everything I was owed with one signature. Ethan watched me the way men do when they think the math is finished. "I'll resign," I said. Relief flickered across his face. He slid a pen toward me. "Good. Be professional about it." "I will," I replied, pushing the folder back untouched. "But I'll write my own resignation letter." The room went very quiet. "By the way, if you're listening right now, I hope you're doing okay today. Maybe take a second to roll your shoulders back, loosen your jaw, and breathe out slowly, just a small reset while the story plays. Where are you listening from tonight? And if stories like this speak to you, staying with me by subscribing means a lot, because what happened next didn't start in that room. It started much earlier. 19 years doesn't disappear just because a new executive wants it gone. I remembered that as I walked back to my office after the meeting, my badge still working, my name still on the door. I had built this place in ways spreadsheets never showed. I joined when we shared servers and panic. I trained teams that outlasted entire management layers. When audits failed, I fixed them. When vendors threatened lawsuits, I negotiated. When systems broke at midnight, my phone rang, not Ethan's. I wasn't visible because things worked. That was the point. The pressure didn't start yesterday. It crept in quietly. My calendar invitations vanished. Meetings I'd led for years moved forward without me. Projects I designed were reassigned to junior managers who asked me for explanations afterward. Ethan called it streamlining. I called it erasure in one leadership meeting. He smiled and said, "We're paying for habits, not value." No one looked at me, but everyone knew later. He referred to my department as legacy overhead in a slide deck. Red numbers. My salary circled. Experience translated into cost. I stayed calm. I documented everything. Every exclusion, every comment, every reassignment that made no operational sense. I saved emails. I archived calendars. I printed contracts. 19 years teaches you patterns. And this one was familiar. What Ethan didn't know was that I had already spoken to an employment attorney, quietly, methodically. We reviewed my contract line by line. Change of control clauses, severance language, bonus triggers, resignation terms. I didn't react because I didn't need to. By the time he called me an outdated expense, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was prepared. And preparation, I'd learned, looks exactly like patience. That quiet discipline would soon turn the pressure inward, where it belonged. and everything he ignored would finally answer back. I didn't rush back to the conference room. I walked, slowly, carrying a single sheet of paper I had already written weeks earlier. It was one sentence, no apology, no explanation, just language, precise, quiet, and deliberate. When I entered, Ethan Crowell and the rest of leadership were still seated, cups of coffee in front of them, victory already settling in. Ethan glanced at his watch. "We need this wrapped up." "Daisy," he said, "HR is waiting." "I understand," I replied, and placed the page on the table. He skimmed it. Not read it skimmed. I could tell by the way his eyes moved too fast. "Searching for a signature, a release, an ending. This works," he said. "Effective immediately." Then, "effective upon receipt," I corrected calmly. He waved a hand. "Same thing." The others nodded. Someone slid the document toward HR. No one asked a question. No one slowed down. They had already decided who I was in this story. That sentence stated my resignation would become effective upon full settlement of all compensation, benefits, and obligations owed under my employment agreement and applicable law. It didn't threaten, it didn't accuse, it simply waited. Ethan signed where indicated. HR stamped it. The moment passed. I thanked them, gathered my notebook, and left the room without raising my voice. My badge still worked. My email still existed. Officially, nothing had changed yet. At home, I placed a copy of the letter in a folder labeled Contracts and another in my safe. I sent a third to my attorney with a single line. "It's done." She replied 10 minutes later. "Good. Now we wait." The beauty of that sentence wasn't cleverness. It was timing. Conditional language is invisible to people in a hurry, and Ethan Crowell was always in a hurry. They thought they had removed me. What they actually did was pause everything. My resignation hadn't taken effect. My employment continued. So did my rights, my salary, and my leverage. They wouldn't realize it immediately. That calm lasted 5 days. Then the phone rang, and the voice on the other end sounded nothing like victory. That was when I understood silence could be sharper than any argument they prepared inside there. At this point, "Do you feel something is about to happen?" 5 days passed without a single word from me. I didn't explain, defend, or warn anyone after leaving the building. I turned off notifications, placed my badge in a drawer, and let the quiet settle. Silence wasn't fear. It was discipline. Each morning, I followed the same routine: coffee, notes, a short walk. I checked nothing connected to the company. No emails, no messages, no curiosity. I knew movement would come from them, not me. Pressure always travels downhill, inside those walls. The celebration had already started. Former colleagues texted cautiously, telling me the mood was light, almost smug. Ethan had announced a successful transition. My role was described as redundant, expensive, resolved. There were jokes about modernization. Laughter carries farther when it thinks it has won. I imagined the spreadsheets updating. Headcount reduced, savings projected, boxes checked. A quiet confidence spreading through conference rooms that smelled like coffee and relief. They believed the problem had exited the building with me. What they didn't see was the clock. 5 days is nothing when you're confident. It's unbearable when you're wrong. I spent that time reviewing documents I already knew by heart. Contracts, amendments, emails, notes from my attorney. Everything stayed exactly where it was. I didn't rehearse speeches or arguments. I waited. Waiting. I'd learned. Unnerves people who mistake speed for control. On the 5th morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. Corporate area code. I let it ring twice. "This is Daisy Knox." I said, "Ms. Knox," a man replied. Voice careful, professional, strained. "My name is Jonathan Myers. I'm calling on behalf of corporate counsel. We need to discuss your resignation letter." I said nothing. "There appears to be some confusion regarding the language you used," he continued. "Specifically, the conditions tied to its effectiveness." The silence stretched. I could hear paper moving on his end, someone whispering, Panic sounds different when it wears a suit. Of course. I finally said, I'm happy to clarify. That was the moment the celebration ended, and it was only the first call. I watched the city outside my window breathe, knowing control had quietly shifted, and that every unanswered question inside their offices would soon demand a very expensive answer from them by the time Jonathan Myers called again. I understood why silence scares lawyers. It leaves room for math. I don't think you understand, he said carefully. Your resignation was accepted. I understand perfectly. I replied, it just hasn't taken effect. There was a pause. I could hear him inhale. Ms. Knox, the company processed your exit last Friday. And yet, I said, I am still employed. I explained slowly, not to teach him, but to let the weight land. My resignation was effective upon full settlement of all compensation, benefits, and contractual obligations. Until that happened, nothing changed. Titles remain. Protections remain. Pay continues. That's not how resignations work, he said, voice tightening. It is when the language is conditional. I answered, which this one is. I could almost see him scanning the document, noticing the word upon too late. Lawyers hate that moment. It's the sound of certainty collapsing. From my side of the call, I stayed calm, not smug, just factual. I'd learned something after 19 years in operations systems don't respond to emotion. They respond to inputs. So you're saying, Jonathan said slowly, that you're still on payroll? Yes. And accruing benefits? Yes. And every day this remains unresolved costs more. I finished for him. Silence again. Longer this time. When he spoke, the confidence was gone. We'll need to review this internally. Of course they would. Review meant meetings. Meetings meant delays. Delays meant money, salary, interest, exposure. And the longer it took, the more documentation existed showing they'd tried to force me out. I offered no threats. I didn't need to. The structure did the work for me. I'll expect a follow-up, I said. In writing. After the call ended, I sat back and allowed myself a single thought. Arrogance is expensive. Ethan Crowell believed speed equaled power. He never considered that haste could lock him into obligations he couldn't spreadsheet away. By the end of that day, I was still employed, still protected, and now, with every sunrise, the balance quietly tipped further in my favor. Pressure doesn't always explode. Sometimes it compounds. That realization settled in deeply, steady and undeniable, as I waited for their next move to reveal itself in silence now. Are you still listening to my story? If you're still here, please leave a comment with the number 1. Ethan didn't wait long before calling me himself. His voice was sharp, controlled, and loud enough to perform authority through a phone line. This is getting ridiculous, he said. You resigned. I submitted a conditional resignation. I replied, those aren't the same thing. He laughed. The sound thin. Our legal team says you're bluffing. We'll sue if you keep this up. That was the moment the conversation shifted from misunderstanding to confrontation. I felt no rush, no heat, just clarity. Ethan, I said, before you threaten litigation, you should read Section 8 of my employment agreement. Silence. Specifically, I continued, the change of control clause, the severance language, and the definition of good reason resignation. You don't get severance if you quit, he snapped. Correct? I said, unless the resignation is forced, conditional, and triggered by material role reduction. I heard papers moving. Someone else was in the room with him now. Good. I laid it out cleanly. Dates, emails, calendar removals, pay reduction attempts, the meeting ultimatum, each item tied to a clause, each clause supported by precedent. I've documented every step, I said. And I've already confirmed this interpretation with counsel. He tried intimidation next. You're damaging your reputation. I'm protecting it. I answered. What Ethan didn't know was that I'd already taken another step, while he was threatening countersuits. I had filed a formal labor complaint citing constructive dismissal and age-based targeting. It wasn't revenge. It was leverage. Parallel pressure changes behavior faster than arguments ever do. "You went to the labor board," he asked, anger cracking through the polish. "Yes," I said, "and they confirmed receipt this morning." The call ended abruptly. No closing line. No dominance restored. I sat quietly afterward, letting the tension drain. Confrontation doesn't require volume. It requires preparation. Ethan believed authority came from threats. I knew it came from alignment between facts, contracts, and time. The moment he chose to fight, he widened the battlefield. And on that field, I was no longer reacting. I was advancing. They would feel the weight of that decision soon, because once a process starts, it rarely stops where you expect it to. And this is where things get weird. The calls started the morning after Ethan's threat, and they didn't slow down. They stacked, overlapped, replaced each other like shifts in a factory that had lost control of its own schedule. I answered calmly every time, because calm unnerves people who expected panic. First came corporate counsel again. Voice softer now, careful with every word. "We're looking for a reasonable path forward," he said. Reasonable always arrives after confidence leaves. I listened, corrected a detail, and waited. By the end of the call, he acknowledged my continued employment status. That was concession number 1. Next was the CFO. His tone was brisk. Numbers first, trying to reclaim ground with arithmetic. "We can resolve this quickly," he said, "if you're flexible." I reminded him that flexibility wasn't required when the contract was clear. He agreed to review my accrued compensation in writing. Concession number 2. HR followed in the afternoon. The voice on the line sounded tired. Rehearsed empathy leaking through policy language. "We want to make sure you feel respected," she said. I asked for written confirmation of benefits continuity. She promised it within the hour. Concession number 3. Each call followed the same arc. They opened with certainty, pivoted to concern, and closed with adjustment. I didn't celebrate, I observed. Pressure was working its way inward, exactly as designed. By the third day, the word settlement finally appeared. Not formally, casually, slipped into a sentence like a test balloon. "Perhaps," counsel suggested, "there's a number that brings closure." "There is," I replied, "the one defined in my agreement." Silence. Then typing. Then a cleared throat. An offer arrived before sunset. It was substantial by their standards, incomplete by mine. It assumed urgency on my part, fear, a desire to escape. I declined it without hesitation. "No," I said simply, "that doesn't resolve the issue." They sounded surprised. I wasn't. Accepting the first offer is how people lose leverage they didn't realize they held. I ended the call politely and watched the phone light up again. The calls wouldn't stop, and neither would the terms improve. That certainty felt satisfying. Pressure has a sound when it peaks. It's quieter than shouting, heavier than silence. And by that week, it filled every conversation I had with them. I scheduled one call and invited everyone at once: corporate counsel, the CFO, HR. Ethan joined late, his name appearing on the screen like an afterthought that still wanted control. "I'll be clear," I said. "This is the final number." I stated it slowly, deliberately, then explained how it was calculated. Contract clauses, accrued compensation, severance triggered by constructive dismissal, interest for every day they delayed. Nothing emotional, just math. Ethan interrupted. "This is extortion." "No," I replied. "This is cost." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. The CFO asked for time. I declined. Time was no longer free, I added, calmly. That if we didn't resolve this immediately, litigation and regulatory review would continue in parallel. I wasn't threatening. I was describing a timeline. What struck me then was how quickly loyalty evaporates when numbers turn red. Board members who once praised Ethan's decisiveness now asked questions. Hard ones. Why wasn't this caught? Why was I still employed? Why were there exposure emails from legal flagged as urgent by evening? The tone shifted. Counsel spoke carefully. HR stopped interrupting. Ethan went quiet. Power, I've learned, doesn't disappear. It relocates. Then an email surfaced, forwarded, accidentally. They said it was from Ethan, weeks earlier, describing me as legacy overhead and suggesting my exit would reset compensation expectations for older staff. It landed in the wrong inbox, then in mine. That message changed everything. It wasn't strategy anymore. It was evidence. When the board reconvened without Ethan, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Arrogance always assumes silence will protect it. But silence preserves records too. I restated my number once more. No embellishment, no apology. The line went quiet again, but this time, the pressure had nowhere left to go. In that moment, I understood the fight was finished. Not because they agreed with me, but because the system they trusted had finally turned against the man who built it carelessly, all on record forever. The confirmation arrived on a quiet morning, the kind that feels ordinary until it isn't. I was standing in my kitchen when my phone buzzed, not with a call this time, but with a notification from my bank. The funds had cleared, not pending, not scheduled, complete, for the first time in weeks. My shoulders dropped. I didn't celebrate immediately. I sat down, breathed, and reread the settlement email slowly. Every term matched what we agreed. Every obligation fulfilled. The numbers aligned exactly with my final calculation. There were no surprises left, which was the point. An hour later, corporate counsel called again, his voice noticeably steadier. The wire transfer has been completed, he said. We'll need your confirmation so we can finalize the paperwork. You have it, I replied. Once the documents reflect receipt in full, they did. By early afternoon, my resignation officially became effective. The condition had been satisfied. The system closed itself cleanly, just as it was designed to do. I was no longer an employee, and for the first time, that truth felt earned instead of forced. What surprised me most wasn't the money. It was the silence that followed. No more urgent calls, no more negotiations disguised as concern. The noise collapsed into stillness, and with it, the tension I'd been carrying finally loosened its grip. Late that day, another message came through, this one indirect. A former colleague texted carefully, choosing words the way people do when walls might be listening. Ethan Crowell, I was told, had been placed under internal review. The board wanted answers, the email, the exposure, the cost. His certainty had become a liability. I felt no urge to comment. Victory didn't need witnesses. I closed my laptop, stepped outside, and let the air settle around me. 19 years had ended not with an argument, but with a transfer receipt and a signature timestamp. That felt right. Justice, I realized, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, clears, and leaves you standing there, finally free, with nothing left to prove and everything behind you resolved. I woke up the next morning without an alarm, and for the first time in years, nothing was waiting for me to fix. The chapter with that company was closed, not with bitterness, but with balance. I had chosen my exit, on my terms, and that mattered. Freedom felt quiet, no emails, no calendar alerts, just space to think about what I wanted next, not what needed saving. I began planning consulting work, selective and intentional, the kind where experience is respected instead of discounted. I wasn't running anymore, I was deciding. A week later, the news reached me indirectly. Ethan Crowell was out. The board framed it as strategic leadership realignment, but everyone knew what it meant. His shortcuts had been exposed. His confidence had cost real money. Reputation, once cracked, doesn't heal easily. I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. Justice doesn't require spectacle. It requires patience, documentation, and the discipline to let systems reveal the truth on their own timeline. That afternoon, my phone rang. An old colleague, voice low. Careful, they're doing the same thing to me, she said. And I remembered what you did. I looked out the window and smiled softly. Some lessons don't end. I didn't win by shouting or proving anyone wrong in the moment. I won by understanding the rules, respecting myself, and waiting when waiting felt hardest. This story taught me that dignity isn't loud, it's steady. And sometimes, the most human thing you can do is stay calm when you're being pushed, because calm lets you see clearly if you stayed with me until the end. Thank you. Truly. I'd love to know, have you ever faced something similar? And how did it change you? Where are you listening from right now? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated, a like, a share, or a quiet subscription helps this space grow.